3 hours into the flight, Maya needed to use the restroom. She had been putting it off, knowing that getting up and walking down the aisle would draw attention. But she could not wait any longer. She pressed the button on her armrest to unlock her braces, and they shifted from sitting mode to standing mode with a quiet click. Using the seat in front of her for support, she pulled herself up carefully. The braces locked into place around her legs, providing the stability she needed to walk. The process took about 30 seconds, something she had done thousands of times before. She steadied herself and took a breath before starting down the aisle. Maya had only taken 3 steps when Claire appeared in front of her, seemingly out of nowhere. The flight attendant's expression was no longer politely neutral. There was something sharp in her eyes now, something that made Maya's stomach tighten with unease. Claire held up one hand as if to stop her. She said that passengers with mobility devices needed to remain seated during the flight, unless it was absolutely necessary. Her tone had changed too, from professional to suspicious. Maya kept her voice calm and explained that she needed to use the restroom, which certainly qualified as necessary. Claire crossed her arms and said she would need to see Maya's medical documentation. She claimed the airline had been having problems with passengers faking disabilities to get priority boarding and extra legroom. Maya felt like she had been slapped. She stared at Claire, trying to process what she had just heard. The flight attendant was accusing her of lying, of pretending to need her braces. Maya asked her to repeat what she had just said, hoping she had misunderstood. But Claire said it again, more firmly this time. She claimed she had seen Maya walking normally when she boarded, and that she suspected Maya was taking advantage of disability accommodations. Maya felt her hands start to shake, not from her medical condition but from anger and disbelief. She explained that she had a legitimate spinal injury, that her braces provided necessary support, and that she did not owe anyone her private medical information. Another crew member joined them, a tall man with dark hair and a name tag that read Kevin Wright. He wore the insignia that marked him as the head flight attendant, the supervisor of the cabin crew. He asked what the problem was, and Claire quickly explained her suspicions. She pointed at Maya's braces and said they looked like the kind of device people use to fake injuries. Kevin listened and then turned to Maya with a stern expression. He said that if she was using disability services, the crew had the right to verify her condition. If she could not provide proof, she would need to give up the accessible seating and any special accommodations she had received. Maya felt the blood rushing to her face. She told them clearly that she had purchased a standard ticket, that she had not requested any special accommodations, and that she simply needed to use the bathroom like any other passenger. She explained that her braces were medical devices prescribed by her doctors, and that demanding to see her medical records was a violation of her privacy. Claire smiled in a way that was not friendly at all. She suggested that if Maya could really walk on her own, she should have no problem taking off the braces and walking without them. That would prove she actually needed them, Claire said sweetly. The conversation had gotten loud enough that other passengers were starting to notice. Maya could feel eyes on her from every direction. Some people looked sympathetic. Others just seemed curious about the drama unfolding in the aisle. A few looked at her with the same suspicion that Claire and Kevin wore on their faces. Maya had experienced racism before, had dealt with people doubting her abilities and her achievements because of the color of her skin. She had faced questions about her disability, had encountered buildings and systems that were not designed for people like her, but she had never experienced both forms of discrimination at once so blatantly and so cruelly. An older man sitting nearby spoke up. His name tag from the conference lanyard around his neck read, George Patterson. He told Claire and Kevin to leave Maya alone, that anyone could see she was telling the truth. Kevin turned on him immediately, telling him to stay in his seat and mind his own business. This was crew business, he said, and passengers needed to stay out of it. George looked angry but sat back down, clearly not wanting to cause more trouble. Maya appreciated that he had tried to defend her, but it had not helped. If anything, it seemed to make Kevin more determined to assert his authority. Maya's vision blurred with tears that she tried desperately to hold back. She refused to cry in front of these people, refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing how much they had hurt her, but it was so hard. She felt humiliated, exposed, trapped in the aisle with everyone watching. She thought about Daniel and how horrified he would be if he knew this was happening. These were his employees, people he trusted to represent his company and treat passengers with respect. They had no idea who she was, No idea that they were harassing the wife of the man who signed their paychecks. Part of her wanted to tell them, to see the looks on their faces when they realized their mistake. But another part of her was too proud for that. She should not have to use her husband's name to be treated with basic human decency. She pulled out her personal communicator, the small device that allowed instant communication across star systems. She told Claire and Kevin that she was calling her husband. Claire actually laughed, a short and mean sound. She said that was fine, that calling someone would not change the airline's policies. Kevin nodded in agreement, clearly thinking that Maya was bluffing or that her husband would be unable to help her from wherever he was. They had no idea what was about to happen. They had no idea that the call Maya was about to make would change everything, not just for this flight but for the entire company. They stood there looking smug and self-righteous, convinced they were doing their jobs correctly, convinced they were protecting the airline from fraud. Maya's fingers trembled as she selected Daniel's priority contact and waited for him to answer. She could barely breathe, her chest tight with anger and hurt and humiliation. All she had wanted was to use the restroom and continue her peaceful flight. Instead, she was standing in an aisle being accused of lying about her disability by people who knew nothing about her life or her pain. Daniel Collins was sitting in a boardroom on Earth, surrounded by executives and financial advisors, when his priority line rang. Only 3 people in the entire galaxy had that number: his wife Maya, his daughter Sophie, and his chief of operations. The ringtone was different from his regular calls, a sharp, urgent sound that cut through whatever he was doing. He immediately stood up and excused himself from the meeting, ignoring the surprised looks from the people around the table. When his priority line rang, it meant something important was happening, possibly an emergency. He stepped into the hallway and answered the call, his heart already beating faster with worry. Maya's face appeared on the small screen, and Daniel knew instantly that something was very wrong. She was trying to hold herself together, but he could see the tears in her eyes and the way her jaw was clenched tight. He asked her what had happened, and she began to explain. Her voice shook as she told him about Claire and Kevin, about the accusations, about being blocked from using the restroom and demanded to show medical proof of her disability. With every word she spoke, Daniel felt his anger growing hotter and more intense. He had built Horizon Star Lines on specific principles, on the belief that every passenger deserved to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of who they were or where they came from. The idea that his own crew members were violating those principles, and worse, that they were targeting his wife, made him feel like his head might explode. He forced himself to stay calm for Maya's sake. He asked her which flight she was on, and she told him it was Flight 447 on the Celestial Dream. Daniel knew that ship well, had been there for its launch ceremony 3 years ago. It was one of the flagship vessels of the fleet, top of the line in every way. He told Maya to stay on the line and not to hang up. Then he switched to his company communication channel, the one that connected him directly to every ship and station in the Horizon Star Lines network. He told his assistant to get him Captain Helen Morris of the Celestial Dream immediately, that this was an emergency and could not wait even 1 second. Within 30 seconds, Captain Morris appeared on his secondary screen. She looked surprised to be receiving a direct call from the owner of the company. Most days, Daniel let his operations team handle ship communications. He only called captains directly when there were serious problems or major decisions to be made. She asked if everything was all right, her professional demeanor firmly in place. Daniel told her that no, everything was very much not all right. He explained that his wife was being harassed by her crew, that she was being accused of faking her disability and prevented from using basic facilities. He could see Captain Morris's face change as she processed what he was telling her. First confusion, then shock, then what looked like horror. She asked him to confirm that he meant Dr. Maya Collins, and he said yes. Captain Morris actually went pale, the color draining from her face as she realized the magnitude of what had happened on her ship. She asked which seat Maya was in, and Daniel told her 14A. He gave Captain Morris very clear instructions about what he wanted to happen next. He wanted her to handle the situation personally and immediately. He wanted her to ensure Maya was treated with respect and given anything she needed. And most importantly, he wanted every single crew member involved in the incident brought to her office the moment the ship landed. There would be consequences for this, serious consequences. Captain Morris assured him she would handle it right away and ended the call. Daniel switched back to Maya. He told her that the captain was coming and that everything would be dealt with. Maya nodded but still looked shaken and upset. He wished desperately that he could be there with her, that he could put his arms around her and shield her from the cruelty she had just experienced. He hated that she was alone, that she had to face this kind of treatment without him there to support her. He told her he loved her and that he was so sorry this had happened. Maya managed a small smile and said it was not his fault, but Daniel felt like it was his fault, at least partially. These were his employees, his company, his responsibility. If his crew members thought it was acceptable to treat passengers this way, then he had failed somewhere in training them or screening them or creating the right company culture. Back on the Celestial Dream, Captain Helen Morris moved through the ship faster than she had moved in years. She was a veteran of space travel, had been a captain for over 15 years, and she prided herself on running a tight ship where passengers felt safe and respected. The idea that members of her crew had harassed a passenger, any passenger, made her furious. The fact that it was Dr. Maya Collins, a renowned physician and the wife of Daniel Collins, made the situation even worse. But she knew that even if Maya had been a nobody with no connections, this behavior would still be completely unacceptable. Every person who flew on Horizon Starlines deserved to be treated well. She reached the passenger cabin and immediately spotted the scene. Maya was back in her seat now, but her face was streaked with tears. Several passengers around her looked concerned and upset. Claire and Kevin stood nearby, still looking defensive and self-righteous. They had no idea what was coming. Captain Morris took a deep breath and prepared herself to deliver justice. She asked in a loud, clear voice what exactly was happening here. Kevin straightened up and began to explain. He said they were simply following protocol, that they had observed suspicious behavior from a passenger who claimed to have a disability. He said that Claire had noticed inconsistencies in the passenger's mobility and that they were trying to verify her condition to prevent fraud. Captain Morris let him finish, then asked if the passenger had requested any special accommodations. Kevin admitted that no, she had not. The captain asked if the passenger had caused any safety concerns or disruptions. Again, Kevin said no, that she had simply wanted to use the restroom. Captain Morris felt her anger reach its peak. She asked them why, if the passenger had not requested accommodations and had not caused any problems, they felt it was appropriate to harass Dr. Maya Collins. She said the full name clearly and loudly so that everyone nearby could hear. She continued, explaining that Dr. Collins was a keynote speaker at the Galactic Medical Conference, a renowned physician whose research had helped thousands of people, and the wife of Daniel Collins, who owned this entire airline and every ship in it. The transformation in Claire's face was immediate and dramatic. All the color drained away and her mouth opened in shock. Kevin actually stumbled backward, reaching out to steady himself against a seat. He whispered that it was impossible, that Maya had not said anything about who she was. Captain Morris looked at him with disgust and asked why she would need to. Every passenger deserved respect regardless of their identity or connections. But now Kevin and Claire had not only violated basic human decency, they had also humiliated the owner's wife on his own ship. The captain told them both that they were to report to her office immediately and remain there until the ship landed, that they were suspended from duty, effective right now. Maya Collins walked slowly through the boarding gate of the Celestial Dream, one of the biggest and most expensive starships in the galaxy. Her leg braces made a soft humming sound with each step, the advanced technology keeping her steady as she moved forward. The year was 2287, and humans had been traveling between planets and star systems for over 50 years now. What used to be impossible was now as normal as catching a bus had been back on old Earth. Maya had made this trip many times before, flying from New Terra Station to Kepler Colony, where she worked as a doctor and researcher. She was going to speak at the Galactic Medical Conference, something she did every year. Her husband Daniel had wanted to come with her, but he had important business meetings back on Earth that he could not miss. Daniel Collins owned Horizon Starlines, the company that operated the Celestial Dream and hundreds of other ships. He had built the business from nothing, starting with just one small transport ship and growing it into the largest airline in human space. Maya told him not to worry, that she would be perfectly fine on her own. She had been traveling alone for years, long before she even met Daniel. The ship was beautiful inside, with tall ceilings and wide hallways that made it easy for everyone to move around. Blue lights glowed along the walls, and through the large windows, Maya could see the stars stretching out into forever. She found her seat number 14A right next to a window. She loved watching space during flights, seeing the way stars looked when the ship jumped into faster-than-light travel. It never got old, no matter how many times she saw it. Maya sat down carefully, using her arms to lower herself into the seat. Her braces locked into sitting mode automatically, and she let out a small breath of relief. The accident that injured her spine had happened 5 years ago, during a terraforming project on a moon called Perseus II. A support beam had fallen during an earthquake, and even though the doctors saved her life, her legs never worked the same way again. The braces helped her walk, but she still felt pain sometimes and she tired easily. She had learned to adapt, to plan her days around her energy levels, to ask for help when she needed it. But she never let the injury stop her from doing what she loved. A flight attendant approached her, a young woman with blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her name tag read Claire Bennett. She smiled at Maya, but it was the kind of smile that did not quite reach her eyes. Maya had seen that look before, that mix of politeness and something else, something that made her feel like she was being judged. Claire's eyes moved down to Maya's leg braces, lingering there for just a moment too long. Maya pretended not to notice. She had dealt with stares and questions her whole life, first because of the color of her skin and now because of her disability, sometimes both at once. She had learned that most people did not mean harm, they were just curious or ignorant. But that did not make it feel any better when it happened. Claire checked her tablet and looked at Maya's seat number. She asked if Maya needed anything, her voice bright and professional. Maya said she was fine, thank you. Claire nodded and moved on to the next passenger. Maya pulled out her own tablet and started reviewing her speech for the conference. She had spent weeks preparing it, refining every word and every slide. The topic was about advances in spinal injury treatment, something she knew deeply and personally. She hoped her research would help others who had suffered similar injuries. Maybe one day people like her would not need braces at all. The technology was getting better every year. Gene therapy and nerve regeneration had come so far, but there was still more work to be done. The ship began its pre-flight preparations, and Maya felt the gentle vibration through her seat as the engines powered up. She loved this moment, the anticipation before launch, the knowledge that soon she would be racing through the stars. Other passengers settled into their seats around her. A businessman in a gray suit sat across the aisle, already working on his laptop. A family with 2 young children took up the row behind her, the kids chattering excitedly about seeing the rings of Saturn during the flight path. An elderly couple sat in front of her, holding hands as they waited for takeoff. Maya felt a sense of peace wash over her. Despite everything that had happened in her life, she still found joy in these moments. She still marveled at what humanity had accomplished, spreading across the galaxy, building new homes on distant worlds. The captain's voice came through the speakers, welcoming everyone aboard and announcing their flight time. 12 hours from New Terra Station to Kepler Colony, with 1 jump through hyperspace. Weather at the destination was clear, artificial atmosphere systems functioning perfectly. Maya closed her eyes and settled back in her seat. She thought about Daniel, probably sitting in some boardroom right now making decisions that affected thousands of employees and millions of passengers. He worked so hard, driven by a belief that space travel should be accessible to everyone, not just the wealthy. That was why Horizon Star Lines offered routes to even the smallest colonies, why their prices were lower than competitors, why they had strict policies about treating every passenger with respect and dignity. Maya was proud of what he had built, proud to be his partner in life. The ship lifted off smoothly, pulling away from the station and out into open space. Through her window, Maya watched New Terra shrink into the distance, the planet's 3 moons visible against the darkness. She felt the familiar pressure of acceleration, then the sudden lightness as the artificial gravity compensated. Everything was going perfectly. This was going to be a good flight, she told herself. Just a routine journey to another conference, another opportunity to share her knowledge and help people. She had no idea that in just a few hours everything would change. She had no idea that she was about to face one of the worst experiences of her life, right here on her husband's own ship. She had no idea that the 2 crew members who had seemed so professional and polite were about to reveal something ugly and cruel. But for now, she simply enjoyed the view and the quiet, unaware of what was coming. The rest of the flight passed in a strange and uncomfortable silence. Claire and Kevin had been escorted away by other crew members, their faces showing shock and fear about what would happen to them when the ship landed. Maya sat in her seat, exhausted from the emotional ordeal she had just been through. Captain Morris had apologized profusely, offering Maya anything she needed, but Maya had politely declined any special treatment. All she wanted now was to complete her journey in peace and try to forget the whole horrible experience. The other crew members who came by were nervous and overly polite, clearly terrified that they might do or say something wrong. Maya almost felt bad for them, but then she remembered how Claire and Kevin had treated her and the sympathy faded. George Patterson, the older man who had tried to defend her earlier, came over to her seat. He asked if she was okay and if there was anything he could do. Maya thanked him for speaking up on her behalf and told him she would be fine. George sat down in the empty seat next to her, and they began to talk. He told her that his daughter had cerebral palsy and used a wheelchair. He had seen his daughter face the same kind of ignorance and discrimination too many times over the years. People assuming she could not do things, people treating her like she was less intelligent because her body did not work the same way as theirs, people questioning whether she really needed her wheelchair. He said it broke his heart every time, and seeing what happened to Maya had brought all those feelings back. Maya felt a connection with this stranger, this fellow traveler who understood what it was like to navigate a world that was not always kind to people with disabilities. They talked for almost an hour about their experiences, about the progress that had been made and the work that still needed to be done. George told her about the advocacy work his daughter did, fighting for better accessibility in space stations and colony buildings. Maya told him about her medical research and her hopes that someday, injuries like hers could be completely healed. It was a good conversation, one that helped Maya feel less alone and less upset about what had happened. Other passengers came by throughout the flight as well. Some wanted to express their support and disgust at how the crew had treated her. Others shared their own stories of discrimination, whether based on disability, race, gender, or other factors. A young woman told Maya about being denied a job because the employer did not think someone with epilepsy could be reliable. A man talked about facing constant suspicion and profiling because of his Middle Eastern appearance. An elderly couple described the challenges of traveling with the husband's heart condition and how some crew members treated them like they were being difficult when they asked for help. Maya listened to all of them, realizing that her experience was part of a much larger pattern of prejudice and misunderstanding that persisted even in this advanced age. She thought about how far humanity had come in some ways. They had built ships that could cross the galaxy in hours. They had established colonies on dozens of worlds. They had cured diseases that once killed millions. They had developed technology that seemed like magic compared to what existed just a few centuries ago. But in other ways, humans had not changed much at all. They still judged each other based on appearances. They still made assumptions about people they did not know. They still let fear and ignorance guide their actions instead of compassion and understanding. It was disappointing and frustrating, but Maya also knew that change was possible. Every conversation like the ones she was having now helped plant seeds of awareness and empathy. Meanwhile, Claire and Kevin sat in the captain's office, waiting for their fate to be decided. Neither of them spoke much. Claire had cried for the first hour, mascara running down her face as she realized how badly she had messed up. Kevin sat with his head in his hands, replaying the incident over and over in his mind. He kept thinking about that moment when Captain Morris said Maya's full name and title. The shock had been like ice water in his veins. He had genuinely believed they were doing the right thing, catching someone who was gaming the system. He had convinced himself that Maya's smooth boarding meant she was faking, that her braces were just props. Now he understood how wrong he had been, how his assumptions had led him to humiliate an innocent woman. But even now, sitting in disgrace and facing certain termination, Kevin struggled to fully grasp the depth of his mistake. He kept thinking about the fact that Maya was married to the owner, as if that was the main problem. He did not yet understand that he would have been just as wrong if Maya had been anyone else. The issue was not that he had insulted someone important. The issue was that he had treated another human being with cruelty and disrespect, based on his own prejudiced assumptions. Claire was starting to understand this, as her tears shifted from fear for herself to genuine remorse for what she had done to Maya. She thought about how scared and humiliated Maya must have felt, standing in that aisle with everyone watching, being accused of lying about her own body. Captain Morris checked on them once during the flight. She looked at them with disappointment more than anger. She told them that she had reviewed the security footage and passenger complaint records, and that their version of events did not match reality. Maya had not walked normally during boarding, as Claire claimed. The footage clearly showed her using her braces and moving carefully. Maya had not requested any special accommodations or tried to take advantage of any services. She had simply tried to use the restroom, which was her right as a passenger. The captain said that what they had done was not just a violation of company policy, it was a violation of basic human decency. They had let their biases and assumptions override their training and their common sense. Kevin tried to defend himself, saying that the company had trained them to watch for fraud. Captain Morris cut him off sharply. She said yes, they were trained to notice suspicious behavior, but they were also trained to treat passengers with respect and dignity. They were trained that disability can look different for different people. They were trained never to demand medical documentation unless absolutely necessary for safety reasons. They had ignored all of that training because of their own prejudices. The captain left them there to think about what they had done, and the silence in the office became unbearable. Both of them knew their careers were over, that they would be fired as soon as the ship landed. Claire wondered if she would be able to get another job in the industry after this. Kevin wondered how he would explain this to his family, to his friends who had been so proud when he got promoted to head flight attendant. The Galactic Medical Conference began 2 days later, and Maya stood on the stage in front of over 3,000 doctors, researchers, and medical professionals from across human space. She had spent the previous day preparing, revising her speech to include what had happened on the Celestial Dream. Her original presentation had focused purely on the technical aspects of spinal injury treatment, her latest research into nerve regeneration and brain-computer interfaces. But now she felt compelled to talk about something more, to use her platform to address issues that went far beyond medicine. Maya began her speech with the science, explaining the breakthrough her team had achieved in mapping neural pathways and creating synthetic connections that could bypass damaged areas of the spine. She showed data and scans, talked about success rates and potential applications. The audience was engaged and impressed, asking thoughtful questions and taking notes. Then Maya shifted gears. She told them about her flight on the Celestial Dream, about being accused of faking her disability, about being humiliated in front of other passengers. She saw shock ripple through the crowd, heard gasps and murmurs of disbelief. She explained that this was not just her personal story, but a reflection of broader societal problems. Even in 2287, with all their technological advances, humans still struggled with basic acceptance and understanding of disability. She challenged her fellow medical professionals to think beyond just treating bodies. She said that medicine existed within a social context, that doctors and researchers had a responsibility to advocate for their patients and fight against discrimination. She talked about the social model of disability, the idea that people were disabled not just by their bodies but by societies that failed to accommodate and include them. Maya's voice grew stronger and more passionate as she spoke. She talked about the intersection of racism and ableism, how she faced discrimination both as a Black woman and as a person with a disability. She explained that these forms of prejudice often overlapped and reinforced each other, creating unique challenges. She showed statistics about health disparities, about how people of color with disabilities faced worse outcomes and less access to quality care. She challenged the largely white and able-bodied audience to examine their own biases and blind spots. The room was completely silent now, everyone hanging on her words. She ended her speech with a call to action. She urged the medical community to do better, to push for universal design in medical facilities, to ensure their research included diverse populations, to listen to disabled people about their own experiences and needs. She said that the future of medicine was not just about curing diseases or fixing broken bodies. It was about creating a world where everyone could live with dignity and respect, regardless of their physical or mental differences. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. People stood up, clapping and cheering. Several attendees had tears in their eyes. After the speech, Maya was surrounded by people wanting to talk to her. Some shared their own experiences with discrimination. Others asked how they could implement her suggestions in their own work. A group of medical students told her that her words had inspired them to specialize in disability medicine and advocacy. A hospital administrator from Mars Colony asked if she would consult on making their facilities more accessible. A researcher working on prosthetics wanted to collaborate on combining their technologies. Maya spent hours talking to everyone, energized by their enthusiasm and commitment to change. The speech was recorded and uploaded to the Galactic Network, where it quickly went viral. Within days, millions of people had watched it. News outlets across human space picked up the story, not just about Maya's research, but about what had happened to her on the Celestial Dream. Some outlets focused on the scandal, playing up the drama of the owner's wife being mistreated by his own employees. But others took a more thoughtful approach, using the incident as a starting point for broader conversations about disability rights and discrimination in space travel. Disability advocacy groups reached out to Maya, thanking her for speaking up and asking her to join their efforts. The Galactic Alliance for Accessibility invited her to serve on their board. The Coalition for Disability Justice asked her to testify before the Interplanetary Council about the need for stronger anti-discrimination laws. Maya agreed to all of it, throwing herself into advocacy work alongside her medical research. She felt like she had found a new mission, a way to turn her painful experience into something positive and meaningful. Daniel watched all of this with pride and amazement. He had always known Maya was brilliant and compassionate, but seeing her channel her hurt into such powerful advocacy moved him deeply. He also threw himself into making changes at Horizon Starlines. He formed a task force that included disability rights experts, civil rights lawyers, diversity consultants, and people with various disabilities. They met weekly to review company policies and procedures, identifying problems and developing solutions. Maya attended these meetings when her schedule allowed, providing insights that proved invaluable. One of the first changes was a complete overhaul of employee training. The old program had included a brief section on disability accommodation, maybe an hour or two in a week-long training course. The new program dedicated an entire week to understanding disability, unconscious bias, and respectful interaction with all passengers. It included presentations from people with disabilities sharing their experiences. It featured role-playing exercises where employees had to navigate situations requiring empathy and flexibility. It tested workers on their knowledge and required passing scores before they could interact with passengers. The company also implemented new reporting systems. Passengers could now file complaints anonymously through an app or website, and every complaint would be investigated by an independent team. There were also regular surveys asking passengers about their experiences, with specific questions about whether they felt respected and accommodated. Employees who received multiple complaints would face retraining or termination. Those who received praise would get bonuses and recognition. Horizon Starlines partnered with disability organizations to review everything from booking systems to physical ship design. They discovered that while their ships met legal requirements for accessibility, there was room for significant improvement. Bathrooms could be larger and better equipped. Seating could be more flexible. Signage could be clearer. Booking systems could do a better job of communicating options without requiring passengers to disclose private medical information. Daniel approved a major investment in retrofitting existing ships and ensuring new ships incorporated universal design principles from the start. The changes were expensive and time-consuming, but Daniel never wavered in his commitment. He told his board of directors that this was not just about avoiding lawsuits or bad publicity. It was about living up to the values he had founded the company on. It was about treating people right. Some board members worried about the costs and whether customers would care. Daniel reminded them that the right thing to do was not always the profitable thing, but in the long run, companies that treated people well earned loyalty and trust that translated into success. Other transport companies watched what Horizon Starlines was doing. Some dismissed it as an overreaction to one incident. Others saw it as a competitive threat and started implementing their own changes, not wanting to be seen as less progressive. A few reached out to Daniel asking for advice and guidance. He shared everything freely, believing that improving conditions for disabled travelers benefited everyone and should not be treated as proprietary information. Industry conferences began featuring panels on accessibility and inclusion, topics that had previously been relegated to minor sessions if addressed at all. 6 months after the incident on the Celestial Dream, Maya found herself boarding another Horizon Starlines flight. She was traveling to Mars for a disability rights summit, where she would be one of the keynote speakers. As she walked through the boarding tunnel, she noticed the changes immediately. The pathway was wider, with better handrails and clearer signage. The crew members at the gate greeted every passenger warmly, their training evident in the way they made eye contact and spoke respectfully. No one stared at her braces or treated her differently from any other passenger. Her seat was in the accessible section, which had been redesigned based on feedback from disabled travelers. The seats had more space, adjustable armrests, and better positioning for people who needed extra room for medical equipment. The overhead bins were lower and easier to reach. The call buttons were larger and placed where people with limited mobility could access them easily. Maya settled in, feeling a sense of satisfaction at seeing the improvements she had helped design. A flight attendant approached her, a young woman with a bright smile and a name tag that read Amanda Lewis. She asked Maya if she needed anything, her tone warm and genuine. Maya said she was fine, thank you. Amanda nodded and started to move on, then paused and turned back. She said she hoped this was not inappropriate, but she wanted to thank Maya personally. She explained that she had a prosthetic leg, something that was not visible when she wore pants. Before the changes at Horizon Starlines, she had been told that her disability would prevent her from working in passenger services. The company had worried that passengers would not feel comfortable being served by someone with a visible prosthetic, or that she would not be able to handle the physical demands of the job. But the new policies had changed everything. Amanda said that Horizon Starlines now actively recruited people with disabilities, recognizing that they brought valuable perspectives and experiences. She had been hired 3 months ago and loved her job. She told Maya that her advocacy had made this possible, that without Maya speaking up about what happened to her, the company might never have made these changes. Amanda's voice was thick with emotion as she explained what this job meant to her, how it had given her confidence and independence and a sense of purpose. Maya felt tears spring to her eyes. She thanked Amanda for sharing her story and told her how proud she was to see people like them represented in the workforce. After Amanda left, Maya sat thinking about the impact of what had started as such a terrible experience. She thought about how one incident, as painful as it had been, had sparked changes that were helping thousands of people. It did not erase the hurt she had felt that day on the Celestial Dream, but it gave that pain meaning and purpose. The flight took off smoothly, and Maya watched through the window as Earth grew smaller behind them. She pulled out her tablet to review her speech for the summit. The topic was legislative advocacy, specifically about the need for stronger anti-discrimination laws in space travel and colonization. She had been working with several council members on a proposal that would mandate accessibility standards across all human settlements and require companies to prove they were meeting diversity and inclusion goals. The legislation faced opposition from some business groups who claimed it would be too expensive and burdensome. But Maya and her fellow advocates were determined to push it through. During the flight, Maya struck up a conversation with the passenger next to her, an engineer named Lisa Chen who worked on designing habitats for new colonies. Lisa mentioned that she had seen Maya's speech from the medical conference and been moved by it. She said it made her think differently about her work, about how the structures she designed either included or excluded people based on their abilities. Lisa shared some of the changes she had implemented, like ensuring all controls were reachable from different heights and positions, designing spaces that could be easily modified for different needs, and consulting with disabled people during the planning stages rather than treating accessibility as an afterthought. They talked for hours about the challenges and opportunities in creating truly inclusive spaces. Lisa explained that most architects and engineers were trained to think about the average person, to design for some theoretical normal user. But that approach left out huge portions of the population. Maya agreed, noting that the same problem existed in medicine, where research often focused on able-bodied subjects and treatments were designed without considering how they would work for people with different bodies and abilities. They exchanged contact information, agreeing to collaborate on a project designing a fully accessible research facility. When the ship made its stop at an orbital station to pick up more passengers, Maya noticed a family boarding with a young boy who used a powered wheelchair. She watched as the crew helped them get settled, noting how patient and knowledgeable they were about securing the wheelchair and ensuring the family had everything they needed. The mother looked relieved and grateful, clearly not used to such smooth and respectful treatment. Maya made a note to mention this positive example in her speech at the summit. As the flight continued toward Mars, Maya thought about how much had changed in just 6 months and how much more work remained to be done. The improvements at Horizon Starlines were significant, but represented just one company in one industry. There were still countless barriers that disabled people faced every day, from inaccessible buildings to discriminatory attitudes, to lack of representation in media and leadership positions. The fight for true equality and inclusion was far from over, but Maya felt hopeful. She had seen how quickly things could change when people were willing to listen and learn, and do the hard work of examining their biases. She had witnessed the power of speaking up, of refusing to accept discrimination as just the way things were. Her voice had mattered, and it had inspired others to use their voices too. The disability rights movement was growing stronger, with more allies and more momentum than ever before. The ship began its descent toward Mars, and Maya could see the red planet's surface through the window, dotted with the gleaming domes of human settlements. She had been to Mars many times before, but this trip felt different. She was not just coming as a doctor or a researcher. She was coming as an advocate, as someone who had turned personal pain into public action. She was coming to stand with other disabled people and allies to demand better, to fight for a future where everyone could travel and work and live without facing discrimination. Maya thought about Claire and Kevin, the 2 crew members who had been fired after the incident. She had heard through Daniel that Claire had enrolled in diversity training courses and was volunteering with a disability rights organization, trying to educate herself and make amends for her actions. Kevin had been less willing to engage in self-reflection, blaming Maya for ruining his career rather than taking responsibility for his own choices. Maya hoped that eventually he would understand, that he would do the work of examining his prejudices, but she also knew that some people never changed, and she could not make her peace contingent on his growth. What mattered now was moving forward, continuing to push for progress and supporting the next generation of advocates and allies. Maya felt the ship touch down on the Martian surface, the gentle bump of landing bringing her back to the present moment. She gathered her things and prepared to disembark, ready for whatever came next. The Mars Disability Rights Summit was held in the largest conference center in Olympus City, a massive dome that housed over 50,000 people. Maya arrived at the venue early, wanting to walk around and get a feel for the space before her speech. She was immediately impressed by the accessibility features: wide pathways, multiple elevators, adjustable seating in the auditorium, real-time captioning and sign language interpretation for all sessions, quiet rooms for people who needed breaks from sensory stimulation. It was clear that the organizers had thought carefully about inclusion. She ran into several people she knew from her advocacy work, friends and colleagues who were fighting the same battles in different ways. There was Carlos Martinez, a blind lawyer who specialized in discrimination cases. There was Jennifer Kim, a wheelchair user who ran a nonprofit focused on accessible housing. There was Peter Williams, who had autism and worked as a consultant helping companies understand neurodiversity. They greeted Maya warmly, congratulating her on the changes at Horizon Starlines and thanking her for using her platform to raise awareness. The summit featured dozens of sessions on topics ranging from employment discrimination to healthcare access to representation in government. Maya attended several presentations, learning about struggles and successes from across human space. She heard from a group of disabled miners on Titan who had successfully sued their employer for safety violations. She listened to parents advocating for better educational resources for disabled children in remote colonies. She watched a performance by disabled artists who were challenging stereotypes through their work. Each session reinforced her belief that change was possible and that collective action made a difference. When it was time for her keynote speech, Maya felt nervous but ready. She walked onto the stage to thunderous applause, looking out at the sea of faces in the audience. Some people used wheelchairs or other mobility devices. Some had service animals. Some had visible disabilities and some had invisible ones. Some were disabled themselves and others were allies and family members. All of them were there because they believed in the cause of justice and equality. Maya began by thanking everyone for coming and for their commitment to fighting for a better world. She talked about her experience on the Celestial Dream, not dwelling on the pain but focusing on what came after. She described the changes at Horizon Star Lines, the partnerships with advocacy groups, the new training programs and policies. She emphasized that this had not happened because she was married to the owner, but because she and others had demanded accountability and refused to let the incident be swept under the rug. She said that every person in the audience had the same power to demand change in their own lives and communities. Then Maya shifted to talking about the legislative proposal she had been working on. She explained that while individual companies could choose to do better, laws were necessary to ensure minimum standards and protect people from discrimination. The proposed Accessibility in Space Act would require all transport companies, colonies, and space stations to meet specific accessibility standards. It would mandate diversity training for employees. It would create enforcement mechanisms and penalties for violations. It would fund research into assistive technologies and universal design. Maya acknowledged that the proposal faced significant opposition. Business groups argued it would be too costly and complicated to implement. Some politicians claimed it was government overreach. There were even people within the disability community who disagreed about the best approach. But Maya argued passionately that the time for voluntary measures had passed. She said that disabled people had been asking nicely for accommodation for too long, and it was time to demand their rights as a matter of law. She called on everyone in the audience to contact their council representatives, to organize in their communities, to share their stories publicly. She said that change happened when enough people raised their voices together, when the status quo became unsustainable, when those in power could no longer ignore the demands for justice. She reminded them that every major civil rights movement in history had faced similar opposition and obstacles, but persistence and solidarity had won the day. Maya ended her speech with a vision of the future she was fighting for. She imagined a galaxy where disabled people could travel freely without fear of discrimination or barriers, where children with disabilities grew up seeing themselves represented in positions of leadership and authority, where assistive technologies were affordable and accessible to everyone who needed them, where universal design was the norm rather than the exception, where disability was understood not as a tragedy or limitation, but as a natural part of human diversity. The audience rose to their feet, applauding and cheering for several minutes. After the speech, Maya was mobbed by people wanting to talk to her, thank her, share their stories. She spent hours in conversation, energized rather than drained by the interactions. A teenager with Down syndrome told Maya she wanted to become a doctor like her. A veteran who had lost his legs in a mining accident said Maya's advocacy had given him hope for the first time in years. A mother of a disabled child thanked Maya for fighting to make the world better for the next generation. Each conversation reminded Maya why this work mattered so much. That evening, there was a reception for speakers and organizers. Maya stood with Daniel, who had flown to Mars to support her. They watched the crowd mingle and network, building connections that would strengthen the movement. Daniel told Maya how proud he was of her, how inspired he was by her courage and determination. She leaned against him, feeling grateful for his support and partnership. She knew that not everyone had a spouse who understood and championed their work the way Daniel did, and she never took that for granted. A year after the incident on the Celestial Dream, the Accessibility in Space Act passed the Interplanetary Council by a narrow margin. Maya was there for the vote, sitting in the gallery with hundreds of other advocates. When the final tally was announced and they had won, the gallery erupted in celebration. People hugged and cried and cheered. Maya felt overwhelming joy mixed with relief and exhaustion. The fight was not over. Implementation would bring new challenges, but this was a major victory. Horizon Star Lines became one of the first companies to achieve full compliance with the new law, having already implemented most of the required changes. Other companies scrambled to catch up, some resentful and others genuinely committed to doing better. The law was not perfect. There were loopholes and weaknesses that would need to be addressed in future amendments, but it represented real progress. Disabled people across human space reported better experiences traveling and accessing public spaces. Complaints of discrimination decreased significantly in the first year after implementation. Maya continued her medical research while also maintaining her advocacy work. She found that the two pursuits complemented each other, each informing and enriching the other. Her research was more thoughtful and inclusive because of her advocacy. Her advocacy was more effective because of her medical expertise and credibility. She trained a new generation of disabled researchers and advocates, mentoring young people who would carry the work forward. Years later, Maya boarded a Horizon Starlines flight for a routine trip to a conference. A young flight attendant greeted her warmly, someone who had probably been trained under the new protocols and might not even know about the incident that had sparked all the changes. Maya settled into her seat, comfortable and respected, able to travel without fear or stress. She thought about how far things had come and how much had changed because people had been willing to fight for better. As the ship lifted off and headed toward the stars, Maya looked around at her fellow passengers. She saw people of different races, ages, and abilities traveling together. She saw crew members treating everyone with dignity and respect. She saw a world, or rather a galaxy, that was slowly becoming more just and inclusive. There was still work to be done, battles yet to be fought, barriers yet to be broken. But in this moment on this ship, Maya felt hope and satisfaction. She had taken her pain and transformed it into purpose. She had used her voice to create change. And she would keep fighting, keep advocating, keep pushing for a future where everyone belonged and everyone mattered. The journey continued, both through space and toward justice, and Maya was ready for whatever came next. When the Celestial Dream finally docked at Kepler Colony, Maya felt a wave of relief wash over her. The 12-hour journey had felt twice as long after everything that had happened. She gathered her belongings and prepared to disembark, moving slowly and carefully as she always did. The other passengers around her were kind, offering to help carry her bag or asking if she needed anything. She appreciated their concern but politely declined. She had learned long ago to accept help when she truly needed it. But she also valued her independence and did not want to be treated like she was fragile. As she walked down the boarding tunnel toward the arrivals area, she saw Daniel waiting for her at the gate. He had caught the next available transport from Earth as soon as his meeting ended, desperate to be there for her. When he saw her, his face showed such a mix of love and concern and anger that Maya felt tears spring to her eyes again. He rushed forward and swept her into his arms, holding her tightly but carefully, always mindful of her injury. He asked if she was okay, checking her over as if she might be physically hurt. Maya assured him she was fine, just shaken and emotionally drained. Daniel kept his arm around her as they walked, and she leaned into his strength. They went directly to a private meeting room in the station where Captain Morris was waiting with Claire, Kevin, and Victoria Price, the head of human resources for Horizon Starlines. The atmosphere in the room was tense and heavy. Claire had been crying again, her eyes red and swollen. Kevin looked like he wished he could disappear into the floor. Captain Morris stood at attention, her expression serious and professional. Victoria sat at a table with a tablet in front of her, ready to take notes and handle the formal proceedings. When Daniel and Maya entered, everyone stood up except Maya, who moved to a chair and sat down gratefully. Daniel looked at Claire and Kevin with an intensity that made them both flinch. He asked them if they understood what they had done, and his voice was quiet but filled with barely controlled anger. Kevin started to say something about trying to protect the company, but Daniel held up his hand to stop him. He said that what they had done was publicly humiliate a passenger based on assumptions about her disability. They had demanded medical documentation that she was not required to provide. They had blocked her from accessing basic facilities. They had treated her with suspicion and disrespect for no reason other than their own prejudices. Every word Daniel spoke landed like a hammer blow, and Claire started crying harder. Victoria spoke up, her voice cold and formal. She said that after reviewing the incident, watching the security footage, and interviewing witnesses, the company had determined that both Claire and Kevin had violated multiple policies. They had discriminated against a passenger based on disability. They had failed to follow proper protocols. They had created a hostile environment. They had brought shame to Horizon Starlines and everything the company stood for. She looked at them and said clearly that their employment was terminated effective immediately. They would receive their final paychecks and benefits as required by law, but they were never to work for any Horizon Starlines property again. Their names would be flagged in the industry database, making it very difficult for them to find work with any reputable airline or transport company. Kevin tried one more time to explain himself. He said they thought they were doing the right thing, that they had been trained to watch for fraud and abuse of disability services. Daniel cut him off and asked him to be honest about what really happened. He asked Kevin to admit that he saw a black woman with leg braces and immediately assumed she must be lying. He asked if Kevin would have made the same assumptions about a white passenger. Kevin's face flushed red and he could not answer. The silence was damning. Claire sobbed and said she was sorry, that she knew it was wrong, that she had let her own biases cloud her judgment. She said she had grown up in a small town where she never really interacted with people who were different from her, and she realized now how much that had shaped her assumptions and prejudices. Maya had been quiet through most of this, but now she spoke. She said that she appreciated Claire's apology and willingness to acknowledge her mistakes. She said that racism and ableism were not just individual failings, but systemic problems that everyone needed to work on. She told Claire that being fired was not the end of the world, that this could be an opportunity to learn and grow and become a better person. But she also said that the harm had been done, that Claire's words and actions had hurt her deeply and that consequences were necessary. Maya looked at Kevin and said she wished he could be as honest as Claire about his motivations. She said that until he could truly examine his own biases, he would continue to hurt people without even realizing it. Daniel thanked Captain Morris for handling the situation professionally and quickly. He told her that he knew this had been difficult for her as well, and that he appreciated her commitment to doing the right thing. Captain Morris said that she was ashamed this had happened on her ship, that she clearly needed to do better training with her crew. Daniel agreed that training was part of the solution, but said it went deeper than that. The incident had shown him that Horizon Star Lines needed to completely rethink its approach to diversity, inclusion, and disability accommodation. It was not enough to have policies written down somewhere. Those values needed to be lived and breathed by every employee every single day. After Claire and Kevin left the room, escorted by security, Daniel sat down next to Maya and took her hand. He told her again how sorry he was that this had happened. Maya squeezed his hand and said it was not his fault. She said that what happened to her was terrible, but it had also opened her eyes to larger problems. She had been traveling on Horizon Star Lines flights for years and never experienced anything like this before. But how many other passengers had faced similar treatment and just suffered in silence because they did not have the connections or resources to fight back? How many people with disabilities had been questioned and humiliated and just accepted it as the price of traveling? How many people of color had dealt with suspicion and profiling and assumed that was just how things were? Maya told Daniel that she wanted to help him fix this. She said her medical expertise and her personal experience with disability gave her a unique perspective. She could help develop better training programs, better policies, better systems for handling complaints. She could work with disability advocacy groups and civil rights organizations to make Horizon Star Lines a model for the entire industry. Daniel looked at her with such love and admiration. He said that even after being treated so badly, she was thinking about how to make things better for others. That was exactly why he had fallen in love with her all those years ago. She always thought about the bigger picture, always wanted to heal and help and improve things. Victoria said she thought Maya's involvement would be invaluable. She admitted that the Human Resources Department had been relying on outdated training materials and generic corporate policies. They needed someone who truly understood the issues to guide them toward better practices. Maya agreed to serve as a consultant, to dedicate time to this project alongside her medical work. She felt a sense of purpose growing inside her, transforming her anger and hurt into motivation for change.